2. So we are going to do reputation, an easy thing to lose. So this one is written by E.M. Stormsmith, and if you haven't heard of Jane Austen pastiche or Jane Austen-esque kind of novels, they're basically, they're kind of like Jane Austen fan fiction, but it's taking Jane Austen and creating like alternative realities, or like Pride and Prejudice and zombies. Like you suddenly add a whole new genre into the story, and go from there. So this one is really fascinating because it's actually built upon one sentence that's stated in a hysterical moment by Mrs. Bennet, Elizabeth's mom, from Pride and Prejudice. So E.M. Stormsmith, I met her at a conference a couple of weeks ago. She's a lawyer. She's brilliant. She wrote really well. I do not have the guts to do a Jane Austen pastiche. It's really hard to do well, I think, because Jane Austen is unparalleled as a writer. Her words are so precise. It's absolutely amazing. But what I love about these books specifically is that E.M. Stormsmith came up with a new way to view our characters without actually losing who they are, and without simply rewriting the story, you know, and there are no gimmicks or anything like that. Some of the pastiches are really interesting when you bring in a different genre and you put the minds of Elizabeth and Darcy to a certain problem, and it's fascinating. But this one's a really interesting perspective simply because what she does is she keeps the characters the same. She keeps the plot mostly the same, but she changes the ending. So this book starts in the last third of Pride and Prejudice. We jump right into the main conflict. That's the external conflict. So we have Darcy and Elizabeth have gone through pretty much their entire Pride and Prejudice arc. And now they're faced with the external conflict that we thought was a dead end, that's horrifying and devastating as you're reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time. But this one, we just start off in the middle of it, and she changes one aspect of it that creates a new legal situation because of the initial conflict. So in my last video, I talked about there are two main external conflicts in Pride and Prejudice. The first one is the entailment of the estate of Longbourn. So basically, if Mr. Bennet dies, the women of the Bennet family have nothing at all. And then the second one is a bigger conflict. So we jump into the second conflict and we kind of mash up these two situations, and we have a legal situation with Elizabeth and Darcy going through their whole character arc. Now, by starting off with the emotional punch of the novel, the original novel, what we're getting is a beautiful glimpse into what happens if you have characters that are really well known. They have gone through their conflict and their arc, and then suddenly they're faced with a new challenge. And you get to see them working the system of the social context of that time and working with, for, against, toward each other in ways that make sense. So it's kind of a glimpse into their relationship beyond the pages of Pride and Prejudice. But I gotta say, she does a really good job of understanding the actual legality of the social situation that exists, or social context that existed in Austen's England. I studied this period and Jane Austen in grad school, and I was just shocked at the level of detail and understanding that is presented in this. And if you don't understand why some of the Pride and Prejudice stuff is a big deal, I'm telling you, read this book and you will get a better idea of what the actual social expectations are, what an entailment is, and all that kind of stuff. And it's brilliantly done. And she has an amazing set of characters, and it's just a completely different novel. It's basically, it's a gentle look. It's a gentle look at how relationships can grow and deepen when you take away the initial conflict and of individual conflict. And I really loved it. I really respected it. This one, however, is my favorite. This is Cause to Repine. It's the second one, and what I love about this one is it actually starts at the beginning of Pride and Prejudice, where we have our initial conflict. Internal conflict is Elizabeth and Darcy meet and they don't like each other. But what happens? What happens if there's an understanding instead of a dislike immediately? What I love about this is basically you have the same character arc that has to happen. We still have characters at a point that they're not ready to really be fully themselves and live up to the challenges that they need. They're still at the beginning of their arc. But now, instead of that internal conflict, we have to look at each other a little bit differently. We have to interact different. There isn't going to be an automatic entrenching that's going to build the tension as we go along. So some of the conflicts are actually external that have been internalized, which is a really interesting way to do conflict. Because like I said, this one is the external conflicts kind of coming in and forcing these guys into a different route within their storyline. This one is what happens when you have such a thorough understanding of the social context in which you're born, and you actually have an alliance with a person who is your equal. What happens then? Because socially they're not equal, but individually, personally, they are equal. So you have a novel where she shifts some of the plot points from Pride and Prejudice just to a different location, which I think was really smart, because we're not rereading Pride and Prejudice. Instead, we're looking at two people who have different expectations based on their social situation and trying to figure out how to manage that with an ally, instead of, like for Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, we don't really hear about his expectations until about halfway through the novel. And then he kind of tells us his expectations, and it's just kind of okay. Wasn't expecting that, / okay. And if you don't know that era, it might feel less insurmountable, it's just okay, get over your entitlement or whatever. But Cause to Repine is a really good explanation of that time period and how it shapes the minds in different classes and how it forces people into certain social situations and choices that maybe they don't want to make, but if you've basically got a caste system, what choices do you have, basically? So I really like it because it diffuses some of the external conflict drama, but it ups the internal stakes for their characters, which creates a slightly different arc. And I think that's really interesting. So especially since this guy is so well beloved, I adore it. I read it a lot. But sometimes I'm just it only tells me the same story. And I like this one because this one is basically a lab experiment. If you take these and you rearrange things, could this happen? And I think she actually does a really good job of making it plausible, making it logical, and grounding it in a society that doesn't really exist in our world anymore. And I really love it, and I love the what ifs in it. It's brilliant. I will be adding both of these to my regular reading list. They're a lot of fun. So like, subscribe, do all the things. I'm going to leave a link below so you can follow Storm Smith. You can buy the books. They're really amazing. And I think the main thing, what I wanted to talk about this for was it's a practical application of what we've been talking about with character arc and conflict, but also hopefully it's an encouragement if you're a writer to just try a what if you're stuck, or if maybe your book feels a little bit flat. Why don't you just rearrange the conflict a little bit? Why don't you shift an internal conflict and see if that changes how characters have to interact with each other and how they're going to have to brush up against each other? Maybe just take your conflict from one place and move it 2 chapters down or 2 chapters up and see if that changes anything. Because if it doesn't, your conflict and your character arc are not working together to make the proper alchemy. If it does, then it is working, and then you get to decide which emotional impact you want on your reader. So, and at which moment. So anyway, it was lovely to chat with you.